A 65-year-old man whose face was a map of hard-won experience and whose spirit was tempered by the desert sun believed the isolation of his Copperhead Mesa was his final fortress. But on a scorching, dust-choked afternoon, 3 hulking men drove up, sent by the shadow boss of mineral extraction, Magnus Thorne, demanding he sign away the land that had belonged to his late wife's family for generations. Stephen refused. They slammed his head against the porch railing, his vision blurring. And that was the instant a cloud of dust heralded an unexpected arrival. His son, Officer Craig Rodriguez, had just driven onto the property after months away, his loyal canine partner, Rox, stirring beside him in the cruiser. What happened next would turn the lonely cabin into a proving ground of courage, blood, and redemption. And what father and son unearthed beneath the blistering rock would threaten to unmake the entire corrupt county. Before we dive into this incredible tale of courage and redemption, please take a moment to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support helps us share powerful stories like this one. Stephen Clark, his breath leaving his lips in sharp bursts, felt the jarring shock as his head slammed against the porch railing. The 3 figures, Magnus Thorne's hired muscle, were a blur of menace against the sun-baked backdrop of the Copperhead Mesa. His refusal to sign the land over had been answered with swift, brutal violence. Victor, the tallest of the thugs, stood over him, a dark shadow blocking the harsh Nevada light. "You don't get to choose, old man. Thorne owns this county." Stephen tried to push himself up, tasting dust and copper, but a kick to his ribs stole his breath and sent him sprawling onto the dry planks of the porch. It felt like the end, the solitary fight he had always expected finally coming for him on his own terms, and losing. But then, the high-pitched whine of an engine cut through the desert silence, a sound too clean, too fast for a ranch truck. It grew into the distinct, authoritative hum of a government vehicle climbing the ridge, kicking up a rooster tail of crimson dust. The thugs froze, turning as the vehicle, a familiar black and white police canine SUV, slid expertly to a stop right in front of the cabin. The driver's side door opened, and Officer Craig Rodriguez stepped out. He was tall, his uniform crisp despite the heat, his face hardened by years working the rough streets of the city, a face he hadn't expected to see for another week. Beside Craig, a powerful German shepherd, Rox, launched herself from the back, landing silently, every muscle coiled. Rox wasn't barking, she was growling, a low guttural vibration that settled in the chest. Craig's eyes, storm gray like the dust cloud, flicked from his father, crumpled and bleeding on the ground, to the 3 menacing men. Any pleasant surprise of his homecoming was instantly incinerated by white-hot fury. "Police! Back away from him, now!" Victor sneered, trying to recover his composure. "It's just a family dispute, officer. Private property." "He's bleeding," Craig stated flatly, his hand resting on Rox's harness. He didn't wait for a response. "Rox, show!" The command was all the encouragement the canine needed. Rox didn't attack. She was a trained deterrent. She lunged forward, stopping inches from Victor's lead thug, snapping her jaws with terrifying precision, the sound echoing across the mesa. The brute flinched, instinctively stepping back. Craig used the opportunity, moving with the cold efficiency of an officer on duty, not a son. He drove a shoulder into the man blocking the path, sending him sprawling into the railing. The thugs, suddenly facing a coordinated professional intervention, realized they were outmatched. They scrambled back to their vehicle, throwing a final impotent threat over their shoulders. "This isn't over, cop." Craig didn't reply, watching their dust cloud vanish. He immediately dropped his professional facade, rushing to his father. "Dad, talk to me. Are you okay?" Stephen, rubbing his bruised jaw, nodded, his eyes wide with a mix of pain and relief. Just surprised. Craig helped him stand, his gaze sweeping the ground until he found what had fallen, a heavy, plastic-sealed folder stamped with the gold letterhead of Thorn Development Corp. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the contract inside. This wasn't simple theft or a random attack. This was calculated. This was corporate war, and his father, the man who fought alone, was right in the middle of it. Craig pulled out his phone, his eyes hard. His surprise visit had just turned into a homicide investigation.
Craig knelt beside his father, his police-issued gloves moving with gentle efficiency as he checked Stephen's bruising ribs. Stephen insisted it was nothing, swatting his son's hands away with the familiar, stubborn independence that had always defined him. Rox paced the perimeter, her low, warning growl a constant reminder that the threat had only retreated, not vanished. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the Copperhead Mesa in shades of bruised purple and orange, but the beauty was lost on both men. Stephen had already cleaned the wound on his temple and was now glaring at the black canine SUV. "You shouldn't be here, Craig." Craig stood up, the Thorn Development folder heavy in his hand. "They just assaulted you, Dad. They were here to take the land." He pointed to the corporate emblem. "This isn't some drunk passing through. This is calculated. This is why I'm here." "I told you the land wasn't for sale," Stephen barked, his voice raw. He rubbed his beard, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon, refusing to meet Craig's gaze. "This is my problem. You have a job, a life in the city. You need to turn that thing around and go back before they decide to come back when you're not ready." The suggestion, the demand, stung Craig. The rejection was palpable, a wall of self-reliance Stephen had erected between them ever since his mother died. "Go back? After finding you bleeding on the porch? No!" Craig took a deep breath, fighting to keep his police demeanor from shattering. "I already lost Mom, Dad. I'm not going to lose you because you're too proud to call for help." It was an old wound, deliberately scraped open. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken grief and the history of their strained relationship. Avoiding the personal confrontation, Craig shifted to action. Rox, track. The German Shepherd sprang to life, nose to the ground, her professional focus immediate. She traced the fainter tire tracks of the thug's escape vehicle, leaving Craig straight off the paved road and into the brush, following the path they'd used to quickly exit the mesa. After a quarter mile, Rox alerted, her ears twitching near a cluster of abandoned machinery, the remnants of an old, defunct copper operation. Tucked behind a rusty bulldozer, Craig found 3 items: a discarded heavy-duty crowbar, evidence of the assault, a burner phone smashed against a rock, and, most tellingly, a set of high-resolution digital coordinates hastily scribbled on a piece of grease-stained paper. Craig pocketed the evidence. The thugs hadn't just been sent to deliver a threat. They were scouting for access to something at that old mining site. As he looked back toward the cabin, where his father was slowly sweeping up the porch, Craig's professional concern cemented into a fierce, protective commitment. He wasn't leaving, not until he understood exactly what Magnus Thorn wanted, and not until he and Stephen finally rebuilt the bridge that had been crumbling between them for years. Craig stood by the old water pump, his uniform jacket discarded, the desert heat finally starting to break beneath the stars. He held the burner phone and the scribbled coordinates from the abandoned mine in one hand, dialing a familiar number with the other. On the third ring, a cautious voice answered. "Rossi. It's Craig, Rodriguez. Look, I need a favor. Something's happening out here." Deputy Lena Rossi, a former Academy classmate, sounded weary, the sound of static interference suggesting she was miles away. Craig quickly filled her in. The assault, the Thorn Corporation contract, and the odd coordinates. Lena went silent for a moment, and when she spoke, the professional tone was layered with genuine worry. "Thorn? Craig, you need to be careful. Magnus Thorn is not just a tech guy. He's got connections, deep ones, with the DA's office and half the county council. He's been buying up every piece of land he can near the Black Rock line, using shell companies. People who get in his way, they don't usually just get a warning." They beat my father, Lena. That's more than a warning. What is he looking for? Officially, development. New luxury solar farms. Lena's voice dropped to a near whisper. Unofficially, word is he's after something much older, much deeper. He's bringing in illegal deep drilling equipment. You're talking about massive infrastructure changes, maybe irreparable harm. She reluctantly agreed to start pulling permits and public records, a clear tension in her voice indicating she was crossing a line. Armed with the digital coordinates, Craig spent the next morning conducting a methodical sweep of the mesa's eastern boundary, rocks moving silently ahead of him, nose to the dusty ground. Stephen, though still bruised, stalked Craig's movements from the porch, a silent, unapproving sentinel. Near the coordinates, tucked beneath a false rock face, rocks alerted. Craig found a hidden trench covered by camouflage netting. Pulling the netting aside, he saw the undeniable proof that this was not about solar farms. He found deep-set geological markers, not for property lines but for mineral surveying. Even more telling was the equipment, a low-frequency seismic vibrator and thick coiled cables used for sounding subterranean depths. This was preparatory work for deep extraction. Magnus Thorne wasn't building a subdivision. He was trying to strip mine the Copperhead Mesa. And the subtle shift in the terrain confirmed Craig's growing dread. The violence, the high-pressure buyout, the corruption, it was all motivated by something massive and hidden, something far beneath the dust. The second night on the mesa brought a fragile truce. Stephen and Craig sat by the cabin stove, the old veteran's bruised face illuminated by the flickering warmth. Rox lay silently at Craig's feet, occasionally bumping her head against his knee, the silent mediator. Stephen had finally stopped demanding his son leave, accepting for the moment that the external threat was too great to face alone. Craig pushed the map of the seismic markers and the Thorne contract across the table. They're not after copper, Dad. They're looking for something deep, something requiring massive extraction. Lena's digging, but this feels personal, not just corporate. Stephen looked at the documents, then up at his son, the distance in his eyes finally receding. He took a long, shuddering breath. It is personal, son. It always has been. He rose slowly and walked to a chest tucked beneath the dusty bed, retrieving a thick, leather-bound journal. Tucked inside was an older, hand-drawn map on brittle parchment, marked not with geological data, but with indigenous symbols. This land, the Mesa, it was part of your mother's heritage. Her family knew what was here. Stephen's voice lowered, filled with reverence. Beneath that rock, there's an untouched aquifer, the largest in the region. And in that aquifer, dissolved in the water, is a massive deposit of rare earth minerals, the stuff Thorne needs for his tech empire. But that's not the sacred part. It's the water. Your mother swore me to protect it, to ensure it was never contaminated, never touched. The weight of the legacy settled over the room. Stephen finally looked Craig in the eye, his gaze raw. That's why I can't leave. That's why I fight alone. He shifted, the old guilt surfacing. It's like that mission 20 years ago, the one I never talk about. I gave the wrong order, a lapse in judgment. Men died. I came back here, promised my mother I would never fail in my duty again, that I would protect the one thing that still mattered. The Mesa is my last post, Craig. It's my penance. The confession shattered the silent wall between them. Craig didn't argue or offer platitudes. He simply nodded, understanding the depth of his father's need for this fight. The land was not just property. It was a memorial, a promise, and a last chance at redemption.
Father and son finally had a common existential enemy and a shared profound duty. Craig stared at the glowing laptop screen, the cold, clinical language of the spreadsheets a sharp contrast to the earthy reality of the Mesa. Deputy Lena Rossi had just pushed a heavily encrypted file across the state network, circumventing the local firewall. The data dump was everything Craig had hoped for, and worse. Rox shifted restlessly beside him, sensing the tension radiating from her partner. The files detailed a complex web of shell companies, Red Rock Acquisitions, High Desert Leasing, Copperhead Mineral Partners, all tracing back to a single anonymous holding group, which in turn led irrefutably to Magnus Forn. It was a classic corporate smokescreen designed to hide the scale of the operation and the catastrophic environmental impact. Thorn wasn't just looking for lithium. He was planning to clear-cut and deep drill across the entire aquifer area. The next document, marked Confidential Internal, was a series of pollution reports specifically focusing on the leaching of heavy metals into groundwater near Thorn's existing small-scale test sites. The numbers were terrifying. The proposed deep mining on the mesa would not just contaminate the protected aquifer, it would poison the primary water supply for 3 downriver communities. These reports, Lena confirmed, had been filed, approved, and then buried by the local district attorney's office under the guise of proprietary information. He bought the DA, Craig muttered, the realization sinking him like a stone. The permits, the environmental reviews, the silence on those pollution levels, it's all being fast-tracked through illegal means. He felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. His city training had prepared him for street thugs and organized crime, but this was a different beast, corruption woven into the legal fabric of the county. Stephen, watching over Craig's shoulder, gripped the back of the chair until his knuckles were white. They're going to destroy everything for a profit, Craig. The water, the legacy, everything. Not yet, Craig replied, his voice steel. Thorn's trying to push this through before anyone sees the real paperwork. He's using intimidation and dirty money to get the official green light. If we go to the local sheriff or the DA, this evidence will disappear and we'll be silenced. Craig leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck, his mind racing. They couldn't use the local system to fight the corruption it was designed to protect. They needed a bigger stage, a public arena where the evidence couldn't be ignored. And they needed irrefutable, undeniable proof of Thorn's personal involvement, not just his shell companies. The tension in the cabinet changed. It was no longer just about personal survival, but about exposing a rot that threatened the lives of thousands. The attack came not at high noon, but just after midnight, the time when confidence is lowest and the shadows are deepest. Stephen was abruptly awakened by Rox, who was no longer just restless, but issuing short, sharp, urgent barks near the window. Craig was instantly awake, his law enforcement instincts seizing control. The air in the cabin was already tainted with a harsh chemical smell, kerosene or something similar. Craig yanked the door open and was met not by a man, but a wall of heat and the hungry crackle of fire. Someone had drenched the corner of the main structure, and Stevens attached equipment shed with accelerant. Flames were already climbing the dry wooden beams, throwing erratic shadows across the mesa. This wasn't intimidation. This was destruction. This was Thorn ensuring their evidence and their home vanished. "Sabotage!" Craig yelled, grabbing the nearest fire extinguisher. "Rox, patrol the perimeter. Find the source." Stephen, despite his age and injuries, moved with the veteran's clear-eyed urgency, grabbing buckets and quickly organizing the small, dusty generator pump. "The well! Get the hose hooked up!" Their past arguments, the unspoken hurt, were instantly irrelevant, replaced by the primitive need to fight the immediate threat. They were a unified force, shoulder to shoulder, battling a shared enemy that was consuming their home. Craig emptied the fire extinguisher, knocking down the most aggressive flames near the door, then turned to the shed. He saw a shape retreating into the darkness. A lone, smaller, swifter figure than the previous thugs, a professional. Rox had already spotted him, too, tearing across the yard like a streak of black and tan lightning, her low snarl morphing into a full-throated challenge. The saboteur dropped what looked like a small, smoking canister, a secondary explosive, and fled, disappearing into the pre-dawn scrub. Rox chased him to the mesa boundary before Craig's frantic whistle brought her back, her loyalty to her partner overriding the chase. Stephen wrestled with the old pump, finally coaxing it to life. Water, precious sacred water from the aquifer, sputtered through the hose. Father and son worked in frantic silence. Craig holding the hose steady, while Stephen directed the spray, their bodies moving in perfect, desperate synchronization. The heat was suffocating, the smoke blinding, but they fought with the ferocity of men defending their last stand. Finally, the fire died down, leaving behind only smoldering ash, the acrid smell of burned chemicals, and the sounds of their ragged breathing. The shed was badly damaged, Stephen's communication gear ruined, but the cabin itself was saved. Craig collapsed onto the porch, coughing, and looked at his father. Stephen looked back, his eyes tired but clear, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He clapped Craig on the shoulder, a gesture of pride and acceptance Craig hadn't felt in years. "Good work, son," Stephen rasped. The blaze had failed to burn down their home, but it had successfully burned away the last of their resentment. They were fully united now, bound by the ashes and the shared knowledge of how much they still had to lose. The charred remains of the equipment shed served as a grim monument to Thorne's intent. With Stephen busy securing the remaining property and rigging a new subtle alarm system, Craig knew that he had to strike fast and hard. He needed Thorne's voice, not just his company's paperwork. Drawing on his canine unit experience, he and Rox began preparing the trap. Craig had identified a pattern. The thugs had a staging point, a forgotten fuel depot near the highway that they used before and after their nighttime visits to the mesa. They were predictable.
Craig radioed Lena, who was risking her job covering their tracks. She confirmed the appearance of one of Thorne's key enforcers, a man named Denton, at the fuel depot, ostensibly refueling a truck, but really acting as a forward sentinel. Craig and Rox moved out under the cover of a midday thermal inversion, the heat masking their scent and suppressing sound. They approached the depot from the south ridge, the sun at their back. Denton, large and arrogant, was lounging near his truck, fiddling with a handheld radio. Craig gave Rox the silent signal. The German Shepherd moved low and fast, hugging the ground cover, a hunter in the tall, dry grass. Craig followed, utilizing the professional training Stephen had once taught him years ago. Move like the earth moves. Rox closed the distance with breathtaking speed. Denton looked up just as a shadow fell over him. Before he could react, Rox was on him, a controlled takedown. She didn't bite. She used her weight and her muzzle to pin his arm, rendering him immobile and screaming in surprise. Craig was over him in an instant, securing the man's wrists with plastic cuffs. "Where is it?" Craig demanded, his face inches from the startled enforcer's man. Denton struggled, but the pressure from Rox's stance was irresistible. Craig searched him quickly, finding a secure, heavily encrypted thumb drive tucked into a vest pocket, far too sensitive for a simple muscle to carry. Back at the cabin, while Stephen kept a wary watch, Craig managed to bypass the security, revealing a short, private video file. The video was a close-up of Thorne, seated in a plush office, speaking casually to an unseen person. "I told the DA to clear that pollution report yesterday. He needs to fast-track the permits before the State Environmental Board gets wind of the aquifer. Tell him the usual bonus will hit his Cayman account by Monday." Craig replayed the confession, his hand trembling slightly. This was it. Direct admission, irrefutable evidence. Thorne's voice, his face. It was everything they needed, but it was useless locally. "We can't walk this into the sheriff's office, Dad," Craig said, powering down the screen. "It'll be deleted and will be discredited. We have to go outside the system. We have to take this public, make it so big they can't bury it." The decision was final. They would crash Thorne's upcoming county council presentation. The county council chambers were packed, the air thick with manufactured anticipation. Magnus Thorne, slick in a bespoke suit, was at the podium, his voice booming as he presented his fake proposal for Copperhead EcoSmart development. The local news cameras rolled, broadcasting his polished lies live across the state. In the back, tucked into a service entrance, Craig, in his full-duty uniform, stood ready. Beside him, Stephen was a solid, watchful presence, and Deputy Lena Rossi, pale but determined, gripped the folder containing the encrypted pollution data. Rox was tethered securely, a magnificent, calm presence amidst human tension. Thorne was reaching the grand finale of his speech when Craig made his move. He strode through the main double doors, Rox moving in perfect heel beside him, the polished leather of his boots echoing loudly on the marble floor. The sight of the uniformed officer and the imposing canine instantly silenced the room. "I move to present an objection to the proceedings, council members," Craig announced, his voice clear and ringing with authority. Thorne whirled around, his face collapsing from polished charm into pure cold fury. "Who the hell is this? Security! Get him out of here!" Craig ignored him, walking directly to the central projection screen. "My name is Officer Craig Rodriguez, and I have evidence that Mr. Thorne's proposed development is based on fraud and systematic corruption." Lena, seizing her moment, rushed forward and handed copies of the buried pollution reports to a shocked council member. "These are the public reports Mr. Thorne paid the district attorney to suppress. They show his test operations are already poisoning the local watershed." As the council members began frantically flipping through the documents, Craig inserted the secured drive into the projector's connection. The lights dimmed, and Thorne's massive face filled the screen. "I told the DA to clear that pollution report yesterday. He needs to fast-track the permits before the State Environmental Board gets wind of the aquifer. Tell him the usual bonus will hit his Cayman account by Monday." Thorne's casual admission echoed through the chambers, devastating and final. Chaos erupted. Thorne lunged forward, his face contorted. "Turn that off! It's doctored! Security!" 3 large black-suited guards rushed Craig. This was the true danger. Craig drew his baton, not to attack, but to defend the evidence and the platform. He blocked the first rush, but the second guard grabbed for the thumb drive. "Rox, protect!" The command was a desperate release. Rox launched, not at the guard's throat, but in a controlled, powerful shoulder block, slamming the man sideways against the podium. The disruption bought the precious seconds Craig needed. The council president, horrified and watching their careers dissolve, was already calling the state police. As the guards hesitated, Stephen, fueled by the rage of his beating and years of quiet duty, rushed forward and snatched the thumb drive from the projector, securing it. The local corruption was exposed, the deal was dead, and as the state police sirens wailed outside, Magnus Thorne was put in handcuffs, his empire crumbling in the glare of the live broadcast. The weeks that followed the council meeting were a blur of state investigations and legal maneuvering. Thorne was held without bail, the video evidence and the buried pollution reports proving catastrophic to his defense. The district attorney was indicted, and the machinery of justice, once gummed up by dirty money, finally began to grind. For Craig and Stephen, the fight was over, replaced by a profound, shared silence that was no longer strained, but peaceful. The ultimate victory came not in a courtroom, but in a bill passed by the state legislature. Due to the combined efforts of Craig's irrefutable evidence, Lena's documentation, and Stephen's passionate testimony about his wife's legacy, the Copperhead Mesa and the surrounding untouched aquifer were officially designated a permanent state wilderness reserve. The land was protected, the water safe, and Stephen's promise finally kept. Stephen, the veteran weighed down by past failure, finally found peace. He no longer felt the need to stand guard against the world. His son was home, and the fortress was secure. He spent his days restoring the damaged shed, not as a duty, but as a labor of love. His movements looser, his spirit lighter. Craig, however, had made a decision. He tendered his resignation from the city police force. His sense of duty had shifted from the urban streets to the wild, sacred ground they had saved. Using his training in severance, Craig founded the Clark Rodriguez Canine Active Search and Rescue Academy on the Mesa. The restored shed became his first training facility. He and Rox, now local heroes, began training specialist dogs, not for police work, but for wilderness recovery and environmental protection. The new academy became the new fortress. It guaranteed the land's future, providing a tangible, active layer of stewardship. Stephen was the academy's groundskeeper, geographer, and mentor, teaching survival skills while Craig trained the teams. Father and son, once separated by trauma and pride, now worked side by side, forging a stronger legacy than either had imagined. Craig had not returned home to leave. He had come home to build. The desert air, once smelling of danger and smoke, now carried the clear, sharp scent of pine and purpose.